So you are Nihon Jouzo, which translates to Sake Evangelist?
Yeah, that's probably the best translation.
What's the one most misconception of sake around the world?
Probably that it's very high in alcohol, that it's sharp and harsh. 30, 40 years ago, most Japanese consumers, or at least older men, like sake to finish really quickly. Now a lot of younger brewers are making really long, drawn-out finishes, and both are good. But the point is, look at all of those things, structural as well as overt flavors in the flavor profile.
So what's the biggest difference from like other alcoholic beverages?
And how it's made?
How it's made, or
probably the main thing that's different about other alcoholic beverages is how they use koji. The way that it's made in Japan for sake is kind of unique. Furthermore, it's the only beverage in the world where you've got what they call in Japanese heiko fuku hakko, or multiple parallel fermentation.
So John Gautner-san, welcome to Pivot.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So you are Nihon Jouzo, which translates to Sake Evangelist?
Yeah, that's probably the best translation.
Okay, so what is a Sake Evangelist? What do you do in Japan?
Well, I use that term because I actually do a wide range of things in Japan. I've written a handful of books. I do a lot of educational programs. I'm involved in the publishing of a sake magazine, also an advanced newsletter for industry people. I do a lot of educational programs too, but I also have a small export company that exports sake to the United States.
I see. So what do you do as a sake evangelist?
Again, what I'm trying to do is make sake as popular as I can all around the world. And it's got to start with education. So many people overseas have no idea what it is. No idea about the classification.
It's becoming popular, and I think people know about sake, but...
It is, but it's got a long way to go.
Okay.
It's like 0.2% of all alcohol.
0.2%?
Of all alcohol consumed in the United States.
Okay.
But still, it is growing. It's growing fairly steadily, but still, so much more education has to happen. And the truth is, most people don't want to think, right? They just want to tell me what to drink and I'll drink it. But still, we do have to work on education. That's probably what I put most of my effort into.
What's the one most misconception of sake around the world?
Probably that it's very high in alcohol. That it's sharp and harsh.
Sharp and harsh.
Right. Another might be that it's all supposed to be drunk hot. Those are like the two. You asked for one, I gave you two.
And some people say that they don't drink it, but they think they taste the same because it's made from rice. Do you agree?
Yeah, well, even I had that initial initial thought, right? Like when I first came to Japan in 1988, I would walk into a department store. There's, I don't know, 100 bottles of sake in the wall. I'm like, what the heck are they getting all worked up about? It's made from rice. Little did I know it'd be my career. So yeah, a lot of people think that as well.
Okay, so in like one sentence or like one phrase, how do you describe sake? Why do you are so into sake?
Subtlety is the one word I would use. In other words, I think when you look at some beverages, wine is one example, but not the only one. You've got really expressive aromas and flavors, big, right? And with sake, they're subtle. You got to kind of think about it. You know what I mean? And that's what I like it about. And, in Japanese, I say okubukasa. There's a lot of depth to it, but you can't really initially get it. And even then, my favorite sake are not the ones with huge aromas or the ones with huge flavors. Those can be good too. But I take a sip, I put it down, I go back to the conversation, and 3 seconds later, I go, wow, that's really good. And that's what I think sake has that no other beverage has.
What are some tips you can give advice to people living outside Japan, like to choose the best sake?
Well, the best is going to be your opinion. So what I want people to do is to experience as many different types of sake as possible. Take a bit more time, cost a bit more money, but then that's how you find out what your preferences are. I do like to say that 90% of the time, not always, but 90% of the time sake is fairly priced. So in other words, the more you pay, the more expressive it's going to be. But it doesn't have to be that's the only thing you want to drink. It's not like that, right? There's a lot of more inexpensive sake that one might enjoy too. But that's one of the easiest rules, I think, to get people started. And again, drink as many types as you can, and then your preferences will come out.
What should you concentrate on most when you taste sake? What do you focus on?
Again, just like wine, I would initially look at aromas, right? And there could be a whole range of aromas, and one is not necessarily better than the other. But most premium sake, premium meaning expensive and what is it the most difficult to make, will tend to have fruity aromas. Banana, apple, melon, things like that. If you look for those, you're off to a good start. It's not the only thing you'll see, but let's start with the aromas. Then look at the flavors. Look at how it strikes the palate, sweetness, dryness, acidity, umami, for sure. All those things. Length of finish. And again, things are changing a little bit. 30, 40 years ago, most Japanese consumers, or at least older men,
Yeah.
like sake that finish really quickly. Now a lot of younger brewers are making really long, drawn-out finishes. And both are good. But the point is, look at all of those things, structural as well as overt flavors in the flavor profile as well.
Should you try it with Japanese food, or it doesn't matter?
Well, I mean, it was made to go with Japanese food. It was made to go with washoku.
Yes.
But what's really cool about that is that washoku is the kind of cuisine that makes the most of the raw materials, right? It doesn't have heavy concocted sauces or production methods. And because sake goes with food that was made to bring out the nature of the raw materials, there's nothing huge in sake. You don't have any huge flavors or huge aromas or massive acidity or tannins or anything like that. So it's never going to get in the way, which means that sake pairs with washoku, of course, very well, but a wide range of Western food for sure. The only thing you got to be careful is really powerful flavors in Western food. Big, strong meat, sauces, spicy stuff. But what's really cool is you can eyeball that. You can say, sake that, nah, it's not going to work. And then when you pull that out, almost everything is going to go pretty well, outside of those obvious mismatches.
Obviously. How about age? Is it like wine, or?
There is aged sake out there, but it's like 0.0000001% of the market. It's not a significant part of the market. It can be very enjoyable, but it's a completely different animal. It gets much richer, darker. It changes significantly. But it isn't like wine in that a lot of wine should be laid down, right? A lot of wine's definitely 100% going to improve with maturity. Sake is not like that. It's kind of a long shot. It's kind of a bit of a gamble. And if you like it, you were successful in aging that. But if not, well, enjoy it anyway. Do your best to enjoy it anyway. So it doesn't really, it isn't handled the same way as wine is in terms of maturity. But there can be some good aged sake out there.
What's the international market of sake like? Can you purchase good sake outside Japan, or all the good sake is in Japan?
No, all the good sake is not in Japan, but most of it is.
Most of it.
And when I say good, I mean like top, most expensive, best stuff. Most of that does not leave Japan, but some of it does. If you're in the right place and you have the right funding, you can buy that. Having said that, there's a lot of outstanding sake. Outstanding sake that's available all over the world.
So let's talk about your first encounter with sake. So you came to Japan in 1988,
Right.
As an English teacher.
Yeah, in the JET program.
JET program.
Right.
And you were engineer at the beginning.
Well, I was in engineering before I came to Japan.
Okay.
As an electrical engineer, yeah. And so then I came to Japan in the JET program in '88. And I had sake in the US a few times. And I had it in Japan a few times. But I didn't pay attention. And I didn't really have sake that you drink slowly. Typical atsukan, typical warm sake at an izakaya or another Japanese restaurant. And I just thought, this stuff is whacked, you drink it hot. I didn't think much about it. And then on New Year's Day in 1989, I went to the home of someone, he was a Japanese teacher, years older than me, but he worked at the same, I worked at the school where he taught too. But he was also, grew up in the neighborhood in which I lived at the time, Tsurumi in Yokohama. And so he invited me over his house. And after dinner, I didn't know it, but he was very much into sake. Very wise man. And after dinner, he pulled out 5 big bottles of sake, and we started to taste it. And that's when he taught me a bunch of stuff about the different grades of sake, the realities of the industry, like you don't have to drink this, this is perfectly enjoyable. And I was just really surprised at how varied all 5 of the types were. I was like, wow, these are totally different. And I asked a bunch of questions, I kept tasting, and it was just, that's when my interest in sake was born.
And from that, how did you deepen your knowledge? Why did you choose to stay in Japan?
Well, those are 2 questions.
Yes.
Why did I stay in Japan? One thing led to another. I did the JET program for 2 years, and then I was going to go home. But there was a small company, and I'd become an associate of the president. And they asked me to join their company because they needed an engineer that spoke Japanese. I didn't speak very well then. But they said, you can speak English really well, and you can interact with our other, it's a very small company, 10 people, with everyone else in the company. And we need you because our equipment's made in Switzerland and none of our engineers speak English. So I joined the company as an engineer for a 3-year contract and I stuck that out. But in the meantime, I got into sake.
Okay.
And then one thing led to another. When I left that, I started inching my way towards the sake world. But the way I learned more about it, again, I would just go to places that had good sake. And I would sit down on the counter and ask questions, and I would get the questions answered. And then I would go to good retailers and buy good sake. I would take notes, copious notes all the time. And that was my biggest motivations to learn to read Japanese, was so I could learn more about sake.
Okay. You're allowed to ask questions, or is that considered rude or in Japan?
Oh, of course not. Well, it depends on where you go, right?
Okay.
I mean, some restaurants are really shibui. They're tight. They're not going to talk to you, right? But you don't go to those places.
Like izakaya type of restaurant.
Yeah, but they're busy.
Okay.
I mean, there'll just be places that were famous for sake. Sake pubs.
Sake pubs.
basically, right? And those places want you to ask questions. And they'll have 100 varieties
Yes.
of them. You know, something like aka oni in Sangenjaya is just one example of dozens and dozens and dozens.
I love
But that's
that
one of the
place.
ones I would go with often when I was first getting into sake. I went there a lot. And so they'll answer your questions. And that's how you learn more about it. You write questions down, leads to another question. Eventually I got into a sake tasting club. And also I started to visit breweries a little bit. Back then I really couldn't do it too much on my own. So all these things together would lead to me learning more about sake. When I started to write articles for the Japan Times, for whom I wrote 8 years of twice a month.
And became like a book. You published a book about it.
I published about 4 or 5 books, depending on how you count them.
Okay.
So once I started writing publicly about sake, it's like I can't make this stuff up. I can't be incorrect. So I got much more serious about studying and learning sake.
So what's the biggest difference from like other alcoholic beverages? Like
And how it's made?
How it's made, or
Probably the main thing that's different about other alcoholic beverages is how they use koji. And koji is koji is rice with a mold grown upon it. And as that mold grows, it gives off enzymes that chop the starches into sugar. If you don't do that, you can't get sugar, and then the yeast can't ferment it. Now, there are other beverages in Asia that use koji, but the way that it's made in Japan for sake is kind of unique. Furthermore, it's the only beverage in the world where you've got what they call in Japanese heiko fuku hakko, or multiple parallel fermentation. What that means is, in the same tank, you've got starch being converted into sugar, and the yeast converting that sugar into alcohol at the same time in the same tank. And that's the only beverage in the world that does that. That's what makes it unique. And also, that is what it allows to get 15 to 20% alcohol, because you never get too much sugar.
Right.
And you don't get, the yeast is neither starving nor drowned out by too much sugar. It's a perfect balance, and that's what makes sake unique.
So throughout like the 30 or 40 years since you first encountered sake, has sake changed in like several ways? Like
A million ways.
Yeah. in what way?
Well, it depends. Again, that depends on how you want to look at it. I mean, in terms of flavor profiles, sake became probably a lot more aromatic. At least premium sake, at least high-end sake, at least daiginjo and ginjo, became much more aromatic. But it's actually backed off of that now, right? And as I mentioned earlier, people used to like very clean, very dry, quick finish sake.
Quick finish sake. Yeah.
But now you're getting sweet and acidic,
Right.
And you're getting very long finishes to the sake, much richer sake. A term you hear bounced around is juicy sake, stuff that makes you salivate when you just think about it. So that's one change. But also, production methods have improved and changed. New yeast strains, new varieties of rice are coming out, all kinds of things, and new equipment, tools that make it easier to make better sake, make it easier to control the parameters, temperature and things like that, and measurements of those things when brewing sake. So those are some of the ways that it's changed.
How about technology? Are there any like innovation or like breakthrough technology throughout this 20 or 30 years?
Constantly, but major breakthroughs are few and far between. I mean, there's constant research going on, right? The National Research Institute of Brewing is coming out with new stuff all the time that are little tweaks. But the only thing that I've seen actually take the industry by storm is a way to wash the rice. And usually, before you steam the rice, you've got to wash it so that the powder clinging to it is washed away. You do that before you eat rice too.
Right.
But you have to be really careful with it when you're making rice for sake, because you don't want the grains to stick together at all, right? You want them to all be individual grains.
Yes.
Also, when you grow koji on it, you don't want them clumping together.
Right.
So you got to get all that powder off. There's other reasons you need to do that too. But there's a lot of ways to do it. Most people, you can use a machine. You can just very roughly wash that stuff off. But when you're making premium sake, like ginjo and daiginjo, they would put it in a basket or in a bag and then mix it up and then run more water through it to get the powder out and then let it soak. But recently they came out with a machine, and the main brand is called Woodson. And it's an expensive machine, but it's only about this big. And basically what it does is you put the rice in there and some water, and then it sucks air. The machine, as the water spins, it sucks a little bit of air, creating all these little bubbles in the water that's spinning with the rice.
Wow.
And that blows the powder off the rice very, very well. And in the past 10 years, it's amazing. Almost every brewery you go to now has one of these.
So that was like the breakthrough technology.
Well, it's just, I mean, washing the rice is the technology.
Yeah.
This is just a cool tool.
Cool tool, yeah.
But, and it makes things a lot easier for the brewers. I'm just surprised. You know, usually a lot of brewers are like, nah, we don't do it that way. We prefer to do it this way. It's better. But almost no one says that about the Woodson.
Wow. Why did that happen?
Originally that Woodson was used for washing rice for bento, for school lunches.
Interesting.
And then someone got it, and I don't know if they adapted it or if they changed it a little bit. I don't know. But the technology isn't exactly rocket science.
Right, it's a very simple.
It's very simple, and it's been around a long time. But all of a sudden people are like, well, it was the company Woodson who said, well, maybe we could adapt this to sake brewing. And they did a very good job of it.
Wow. I have some photos I got from you.
Sure.
So this is in which part of,
Yeah, this is a brewery in Chigasaki,
Chigasaki.
Kanagawa Prefecture. And it's Kumazawa Shuzo is the name of the company, and they make a sake called Tensei. That's the brewery that's geographically closest to me. So I do take a lot of tours there for various reasons at various times.
Do they accept a lot of tours or?
Oh, they're not open for tours all the time.
Okay.
But it's possible. You can't just drop in any time and say, give me a tour.
Do you need to be like friends with the people?
Yeah, I'm not so sure, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I am friends with them, and I actually export their sake too.
Okay.
So I've got a good relationship with them.
Gotcha.
And when I do my courses, I do courses in Japan every January and February. I'll take the group down there every year.
Okay.
So they're used to me too, and the people that I bring.
I see. So there's a wooden ceiling?
No, this is a big room in which they actually, shikomigura, and they actually put all the materials into the tanks. And if you climb up, you can see the entrance to the tanks all around, right? In the very back is the koji making room.
Yeah.
And on the far left are the yeast starter tanks, which are smaller. So it's very compact. So you climb up this thing, you make the koji in the back, then you take it to the small tanks on the left, and then you just move, the small tanks are on wheels. When the yeast starter is ready, you move it over on top of one of the tanks, open the thing, and drops down. And then you can just put the rest of the rice in there. Then when you go down beneath the steps, you can do things like check the temperature, take samples if you want to chemical analyses. And in the very back, underneath, is a place where funaba, that's where they actually filter out the rice solids and get the completed sake when they're done. So it's a very, very compact, efficient operation.
Is it a big building or?
It's an old kura. So the original kura is large. However, they only use a small section of it now for brewing sake. They've got restaurants in the old kura. It's a beautiful place. It really is.
You can drink sake in the restaurant.
Of course.
Wow, that's amazing.
They've got like about 4 restaurants on the premises, and one of them is inside the kura.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very worth going down.
This is.
No, those are the Woodsons there.
Woodsons. Oh, this is the.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
It's very small.
Yeah, it's very small. So you can do like 10 kilos at a time, but there's continuous ones too, where you can just put them in and keep going.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, the gentleman on the left is, now he's on my right, is Mr. Igarashi. He's the Toji, the master brewer.
Okay. Great. So let's talk about modern sake. So are there like any like generation change of like the sake makers? Do you spot any? What are you witnessing right now?
So one way to answer that is when I started working with sake back in the mid-90s and started working with brewers, I was always the youngest one. All the brewers were older than me. Now, I'm the oldest. So there's a definite changing of the guard.
Okay.
A lot of, the younger generation is definitely taking over. And it's good. I think the older generation was in an era in the 70s and 80s where you could sell as much as you could bake. Right? The more you made, the more you could sell. And then things started to tighten up in the 80s and getting into the 90s. Oh, there's a million reasons why that started. But let's finish one thing at a time.
Okay.
So I do see the younger generation taking over. And that is good. And I think they're addressing things that the previous generation didn't really address. Like attractive labels, right?
That's right.
And more information.
I
on
love
the back.
labels of the like modern sake.
A lot of them are.
Yeah.
they're not like show off.
No, sure. Very colorful, very pop. You know?
They stand out.
They stand
right?
out, yes.
Good information on the back. So I think that's one thing that's changing a lot too. And they're also changing flavor profiles, but not all of them and not hugely. And that's good. You don't want to push that too much. So what was the question you asked before I pulled you back into this one?
So why the sake is decreasing in the 1980s?
It's been decreasing since 1973.
1973.
And it's actually down to 1/3 of what it was at that peak. But again, there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, I think that one thing is the industry didn't do a good enough job of marketing. And so a lot of younger people look at sake as the old man's drink.
Right.
Right? And so younger people are like, nah, that's what Oyaji drinks. That's nothing interesting
old
about
people
that.
get drunk and sake. That's good for you. That's
Well, not good for you is one thing too, but it's kind of like it's not fashionable
It's
at
not
all.
fashionable, right?
It's not
that's
sexy
the right
at all,
word. That's the
right
word.
They're like, nah, I'll drink
drink wine,
wine,
cocktails or something.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And that has a lot to do with it as well. And again, it's slowly changing. But also, wine started to get popular, and the beer companies are very good at marketing.
Right.
Right? And beer's the number one beverage in the entire world.
Yes,
so.
of course.
They didn't have to work too hard. So there's a combination of reasons like that why sake fell and continues to fall. But lately, if you look at sake statistics, premium sake, and again, premium is a loaded word. You got to be careful with that because all types of sake are enjoyable.
Yeah.
But premium, when I use it, I kind of mean the stuff that's the hardest to make for the brewers, which tends to be light, delicate, and usually aromatic. That stuff is actually growing. Not like this, but just a little bit. So the inexpensive stuff is contracting. Now that's not good because a lot of inexpensive sake, a lot of futsushu, honjozo, is outstanding and the best value in the world, right? But that's really contracting because the people that were regular consumers of that are getting older and older. So that continues to drop, but premium sake does continue to grow.
So you talked about the generation change of the brewers. So are there any like common mindset of the new generation of sake brewers?
More than well, I guess you could call it a common mindset. But I think that there's a conscious effort or realization that the only choice is to shift to premium. Because inexpensive sake is great, but larger brewers with the capacity to do that and do it well and do it inexpensively, right, are going to win that area of consumption. So there's no way you can make it as good as the bigger brewers and as inexpensive as the bigger brewers. It's just not, it's very, very difficult for a smaller brewer to do that. So a lot of smaller brewers are like, okay, we have to shift to premium or innovate some other way. We have to get some kind of thing that makes us special, right? It might be a particular type of sake like Yamahai or Kimoto.
Yes.
Or it might be aged sake. There's not too many of those, but there's a couple that do that. Or it might be very aromatic sake or junmaishu only that focuses on one rice. So I think a lot of younger brewers, the big shift is like, okay, we got to find something special now if we're going to survive.
Are they keen to, exporting sake to the international market?
Of course. All brewers would love to export. And they're all working on it. And it's going well. Exports yeah. Overall.
Overall, okay.
I mean, exports are growing, and they've been growing for, 20 years, maybe 30 years, right? But still, if you look at all of the exports of sake, they're, I believe, less than 7% of all sake produced. Less than 7% is exported, right? If you look at French wine or Italian wine, it's between 25 and 35% of everything made is exported.
Yes.
So the good news is sake's got a lot of potential.
Potentials, yeah.
Right, right. But still, the less than good news is that 7% isn't going to help the market too much.
Right.
But the truth is that many, many brewers would like to export and export more. A lot of them are exporting. But those that aren't would like to do that. So they are all keen to do that. But again, I mean, markets overseas are growing steadily. For example, the United States over the last 20 years, I would say the average is about 10% increase every year. Average. Stronger years, not so strong years. But the point is, you're going to get, hoa jotai. You're going to get flooded markets.
Yeah.
Right? But those will get better. In other words, they'll get too crowded and they'll get better.
Right.
So, I mean, you've got to time it right. And eventually, sake will do better and better and better. But it's a bit of a crowded market once you get it outside. But again, that will alleviate itself with time.
What's the key factor to like expand the sake market? 7%. I think it's a low number.
It is a low number.
I believe I think like everyone should enjoy good Japanese sake. So
Right.
what's the key factor to?
I just think making it more familiar to people.
More familiar.
Right? I mean, and that is happening. Maybe not fast enough, but it is happening. So, for example, it's a matter of familiarity with the product. And there are a lot of producers making sake in the United States now. There's probably 30 very small producers. And the sake is good. Is it as good as Japanese sake? Not typically. But it is good. It's getting better and better and better. But what happens is when they do that, Americans around them in their markets are like, wow, this stuff's actually much better than I ever thought it was. This is interesting. How do you make this stuff? And there's Japanese stuff. Well, of course there's Japanese stuff. That's where it really comes from. Oh, maybe I should check that out too. So it's just a matter of ongoing efforts at education and familiarizing everybody. But with crowded markets, and this is the same way with wine, you need to make people more familiar with it, and then you've got to understand the process, what makes one better than the other. But then you got to have stories. You got to have reasons why this is better.
Right.
Right. It's got to be interesting. Like the brewer that makes this always wears a purple hat, otherwise the sake is not good. Or this particular rice was milled down to 40% and they grew it and only take the best of it and this or that. Or this particular yeast came from flowers. Or this, a million stories. Everything's got one. But you've got to get something that gets people interested. And of course the sake's got to be good too, right? But if you've got like 10 or 12 sakes in front of you, they're probably all going to be good.
Yeah.
And you can't drink all 10 or 12 to find out which one you like the best.
You have to make a choice.
You got to make a choice.
So do you think you need more PR, marketing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's all about marketing. It's all about marketing. But, I mean, here's another thing. You should remember that most Japanese sake producers, are family-run companies.
Right.
And even some of the largest breweries are family-run companies.
Yes.
And so what they don't have is marketing capital that large companies would have.
That's true.
And so, like, for example, if you look at a vodka company,
Okay.
seriously, and they'll just go into the United States or other markets, I'm sure, and they've got tons of money to market, right? Whoever sells the most this month goes to the Caribbean we'll pay for.
Okay.
And it's perfectly valid, but that's you can do that when you're a large company with tons of advertising money and marketing money. Small Japanese breweries are basically not going to be able to do that.
So what's the solution?
Little by little, step by step, day by day.
And maybe they need to learn English, or is
that's okay.
That's okay.
I think a lot of brewers do speak English. And of course, that's good, but that's not a roadblock.
Okay.
That's not a roadblock because in any event, so I work within the United States market, and so that's the one I know the best. But once you get your sake into the United States and the importer takes it from there, the Japanese producers pretty much aren't too involved anymore. That's not necessarily true. They can go to the market and help, and they're always welcome. And they will. Their presence is like, wow, you're the one that made this stuff? This is great. And then people like that. I'll buy another bottle, thank you very much, right?
Okay.
But in terms of where we sell it, how they market it, what states it goes to, that's all handled by the importer.
True.
So there isn't that much more that the Japanese producers could do. And, of course, the local people, well, in that case, the United States, would all speak English, right? Or Spanish or whatever.
Yeah.
But the point is, the local people will speak the local language. So the brewers don't need to learn to speak the local language so much. Of course it helps. But that's not going to be a game changer.
Okay. So little by little, step by step.
Yeah, and it's moving. If you look at exports, just about everywhere they're growing, right? I mean, the United States is the largest importer,
Right.
both in terms of volume and I don't know, financial basis. China's number 2. China and the United States go like this. But lately, China's kind of dropping off for a handful of reasons. So it is growing, and so it's growing. But it's not like this. It's like this, which is probably better, right? Whenever you get a boom, that boom is always going to drop off. If it's little by little, you could probably have higher expectations for a longer period of time.
Okay. So we need to wrap up. So my final questions. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So maybe several questions. So how can we pass on sake to the next generation? Like, what's your vision or prediction of the future of sake?
I think little by little, I think younger consumers in Japan are becoming more interested in sake. Again, it's the newer generation of marketers that know how to market to younger people. And so I think that's moving in a positive direction too. But again, it's about making it look sexy, interesting, appealing to younger people.
Okay, thank you, Johnson. Thank you for joining Pivot.
My pleasure.